Okay, now I'm going to patch the floor and get it ready to start putting the tile down, but the first thing that we need to do is patch the floor with a good cement-based patching compound. This particular compound that I've got is a powder mixture that you mix with an additive. This is a high-performance additive, and this is specially designed to go over some vinyl and concrete. And the reason I want to do that is because I do have some vinyl and some concrete floor here. So I want to make sure that I use the right patching compound. When you go to the big box store, you'll see that there's a number of different kinds of leveling and patching compound made out of different mixtures of polymer and etc. So you want to make sure that you get the right one to make sure that it sticks properly to the floor. This is something that I'll mix up, and you might have a drill with a mixing bit on it. We'll go ahead and start mixing that up and start prepping the floor and patching the areas that need to be patched. Okay, now that we've gotten through the prep portion of the floor and we're ready to do some tiling, it's important to talk a little bit about the type of tile that you may want to use. There are basically two types of tiles generally that you can buy at a big box store that you'll probably do for your project. One of them is ceramic tile and the other one is porcelain tile. I've decided to go with a porcelain tile, and I think that most people would do that in sort of a heavy use area like a kitchen. There's a number of advantages of using porcelain tile over ceramic. Porcelain tile is a harder tile. It absorbs less water absorption rate than ceramic tile. The other thing is the color basically goes all the way through the tile, so if you were to chip it, you really wouldn't see a different color underneath. There's great advantages. It's basically a harder, more durable tile. One of the other advantages, and not in this particular case, but ceramic tile you would never use outside. Porcelain tile you could probably use outside, but you'd have to use a special purpose porcelain tile. The other thing about ceramic tile versus porcelain tile is ceramic tile, being not as hard, is really easier to cut for the normal home do-it-yourself type person. So that's, I guess, one of the disadvantages of porcelain tile. It is much harder, so it's also harder to cut, so keep that in mind. But in my particular case here, I decided to go with the porcelain tile. I think it's a better choice. Basically a 12 by 12 tile. So we're going to go ahead and get started with that now. One of the most important things you can do before you start installing your tiles is decide exactly how you want to lay them out. Now you can lay them out so they are perpendicular to the room, or you can lay them out so they're sort of a diagonal pattern in the room. Diagonal patterns are a little bit harder to do, requires more cuts, a little more of a complex way of doing it. I suggest if you're a starter that you do it where they're just square or perpendicular to the room. One of the things that helps you ensure that you're going to do a right job and you're going to get them installed properly is start out with grid lines. I don't know if you can see that I've drawn a grid line on the floor here, and also an intersecting grid line here. Now where I decided, and it's going to be different for each job, this particular grid line is going to be the edge of the tiles where they intersect. And the reason that I selected doing it this way is because I have a hallway this way and I have a door opening this way. And what I did is I divided them in half, because what I want to do, and this also helps with the aesthetic appearance of the way you install the tiles, is half the tile will go on this side of the line and the other half of the tile will go on that side of the line. So it actually looks symmetrical. Symmetrical tile going down the hallway, so you don't have different size cuts on each side, and also as you come in through the doorway that you don't have different size cuts on each side. That just helps distinguish a little bit between an amateur and sort of a professional job. So it looks like you gave some forethought to how you're installing and try to keep everything as symmetrical as possible. Obviously, as you're going on through the rest of the room, when you get to the other side of the room, you may have different door openings and different cutouts that you have to make, and it's not going to be symmetrical because that's just the way the end of the room lays out. But the area where you have the most traffic down this hallway and through this doorway, I believe, in my opinion, it's most important to make it as aesthetically pleasing as possible. So very important before you get started. Lay out your grid lines, decide where your tiles are going to go. You can even dry fit some, lay them down on the floor to help you get a visual of how it's going to look after you have it installed. So proper planning really helps the job go smoothly and helps you from making mistakes as you're actually installing it over the thin set mortar, which then it's a little bit later or a little bit difficult to pull the tiles back up and change your pattern. So very important to decide that ahead of time. Now we're going to mix up the thin set mortar that we're going to use to adhere the tiles to the floor. I bought this 50-pound bag of porcelain tile mortar. It's used specifically for porcelain tiles. You can get some for ceramic tiles, some for porcelain tiles. But since we're using porcelain tiles in this particular job, I got this. You mix this up with water, you let it set for a little while, and then you spread it on the floor with your notch trowel. So we're going to go ahead and do that now. When you start the process of installing your floor, obviously you have to cut the tiles. Unfortunately right now it's winter outside, so I'm going to have to do this inside. You can see that I have Visqueen set up around the area here. I'm doing it in the house. And the reason for this is because I'm going to be using a wet saw, and the wet saw uses water to cool the tiles as you're cutting them, and it tends to shoot the water around the room. So you want to protect your room as much as possible. I have Visqueen up on the sides, I have Visqueen on the floor. Hopefully when you're doing it, if you're going to use a wet saw, that you have the ability to set it up outside. It's not in the middle of the winter and you can do it outside. It makes it much easier. The most important tool if you're going to be doing a lot of tile work, and even if you're not going to do a lot of tile work, is having a wet saw. Obviously this is a small sort of residential do-it-yourself type of tile wet saw cutter. It's not the big professional type. If you're going to be doing a lot of it or you're cutting big tiles, you want to use a bigger, more professional unit. But this works great for the occasional job that you're doing around the house. It looks like a table saw, but it's actually got a diamond blade on it for cutting the tiles. It has a water reservoir for keeping the tiles cool as it's cutting them. There's also another way of cutting the tiles. You can use a tile cutter. This is a 14-inch tile cutter that you can use for scoring the tiles and cutting them. That works well, but if you're making a lot of intricate cuts or you're making some cutouts where you're actually making a 90-degree cut, you can't use a tile cutter. You need something like a tile saw cutter. The other tool that's important of the three basic tools is a tile nipper. This helps nip off little chunks of the tile if you're trying to go around something. Sometimes this is beneficial. But if you have a tile saw cutter, you may or may not need this, but this is a pretty good tool to have. So keep this with you as well. I have started the process of dry fitting and cutting some of the tiles here in the entrance door as we spoke earlier. And the reason why I did this is because I wanted to get the cuts before I started doing the mortaring of the tiles down to the floor, get some of the cuts made as I get started. You can see, as I talked earlier about making this entrance symmetrical, the two tiles in the center are obviously full tiles, and the cutouts on each side of the doorway are basically identical and symmetrical. So that, I think, gives it sort of a nice appearance, an aesthetic appearance that is going to be nice in the overall completion of the project. We're going to be installing the tiles with thin-set mortar that we're going to mix up and use to install the tiles and adhere them to the floor. What we're going to end up using here to install the thin-set is a notch trowel. This particular one has got a notch in it of 3/8 inch by 1/4 inch. Maybe we should be using something a little bit bigger, but I think this will work for 12-inch tiles. Generally use a 1/4 inch by 1/4 inch trowel if you're going to use for installing the thin-set mortar on tiles that are 8 inches or smaller. Ours are 12-inch tiles, so I think this will work pretty good. But there's different types of trowels, different size notches. There's also V-notch trowels, which maybe are not used for this particular application. But the most important thing to do is to get the right trowel to use for installing the adhesive that you're going to use, and also make sure that it's the right size and the right type for the type of tiles that you're installing. One of the things that can be very beneficial in helping you install the tiles, and some people use them and some people don't, are these tile spacers. They're actually designed to go in between the tiles as you're installing them down on the floor, and it helps keeping the spacing proper. You can buy them in different sizes, 1/4 inch, 1/8 inch, 3/16 inch. It helps you as you're installing them. So that's something that you can do. I would say that if you're a beginner, it'd be very helpful to do that. A lot of people don't use them. Professionals sometimes do, sometimes don't. It really depends on what you feel comfortable with. In my particular case, I probably will not be using them, but I wanted to show you here that they are available and something that you can use in installing the tiles. What you want to do when you're setting the tiles down is actually butt it up against the one next to it, right up along the side of it, and then roll it backwards to your gap, distance that you want to have between the tiles. What that does, it helps you line up the tiles, and it also keeps any of the mortar on the floor from squeezing out in between the joints. So that's a little bit of a tip that helps you in installing the tiles.